Hi guys, I've been working with PhotoLab 7 for a few months now, and I've found that I've made some small changes to my workflow, making it better supportive of my decisions as I move through that workflow. I'd like to share those with you, so I've prepared a video which is workflow from beginning to end. We'll go through all the basic setup, lighting, contrast, colour, etc. So without further ado, let's have a look. Here's the picture that we're going to work on. It's quite well balanced in terms of exposure, so this is exactly as it was shot in the camera. So we've got no clipping going on the darks and no clipping going on the whites. So this is okay, we can work with this. It looks very flat, but it's a raw file, and raw files always do. So it's our job in processing is to bring life back into this picture. In so doing, create a bit of depth, create some interest, visual interest in the picture. What's the subject? It's a village called Fuentesante, and it's in the Tabernas desert in southern Spain. And the interesting thing about it is this village is completely deserted. There is not a single person there. And the palm tree that we're seeing here in the middle of the screen, it denotes wealth. So at one time this village was quite a wealthy conglomeration. And this was a status symbol, so it was abandoned in the 1930s, according to the history books. Anyway, let's get on with the processing. So what I'm going to do is to take us through the processing in a number of stages, which more or less reflect my workflow. We do different things at different stages, but broadly, there's a setup stage, which we're going to look at in a second. There is then a light stage, so we're looking at the amount of light, the contrast in the light, the darks and lights and shadows. Then we look at the colour, and then we look at any local adjustments that are needed. First thing I'll do is I'll add an optical correction. And I tend to use the optical corrections only. I don't go for presets, but that's just my personal choice. If we compare, you'll see that it's made some optical corrections. So there's some lens distortion going on, and if you look at the corners, you'll see that they're very slightly darker when we turn the correction off. Okay, there's a couple of things that I want to check. So I'm going to check that I'm using DxO wide gamut. That's perfect. That gives us the most color information that we can handle. And the last thing I'm going to do is to set the crop. Now the reason I do this, and this, okay, is probably a good practice for every single picture, but it's very important in landscape photography, because if you look at the sky area, which is the top third of the picture, this is demonstrably lighter than the bottom 2/3. And if you rebalance the picture, you're also going to rebalance the histogram. And the reason that this is important is that I use the histogram as a cue to tell me when I'm going kind of over the top in my adjustments. And it's very easy to do, so you're constantly referring back to it. So what I want is a histogram that reflects my actual crop as it might be finished. So we'll load the histogram tool, we'll set it to, I love 16:9 pictures, they just make my heart sing. They're a little bit more sort of filmic, I always think. So I think we'll go with that as a crop. We've got the horizon roughly on the top third. So let's go with that. So from here, we will go to light. Now, light and tone are the first things that I address after I've done the setup, and the reason for this should be, I hope, really obvious. If I increase the amount of light in a photograph, it subtly changes the colours. So if I were to do it the other way around, set my colour up before I've done the adjustments to the light and the tone, I could end up with a very different photograph. So it's really a gotcha waiting to happen. Always do the light adjustments first. Exposure is good, so we kind of like the exposure, and exposure is a global adjustment in any case, so everything will get brighter. And what we've got to look out for here is we've got decent contrast in the sky, but these areas are quite bright. So any increase in exposure will risk blowing these areas out. I'll just demonstrate that there. So when we move this to the right, you're beginning to get basically what I would think of too bright. So I'm going to leave that on as it was. Smart lighting, you can have a look and see if that makes any difference. It does make a slight difference. What I would do, you have some choices here. Contrast is a global thing, so this will increase, push the whites, push the blacks, or push the pixel values towards the white and towards the blacks. So as we increase the contrast, you can see it getting very, very contrasty all over the picture. And this isn't really what I want. I want more control over this, and my sky is quite contrasty, so if we push it up here using the contrast tool, it's only going to get more contrasty. I don't really want that. There was no storm approaching. So we'll put that back, and what we'll do is we'll use the highlights and the selective tones to bring some of this into play. And that's just what we're after, is a little bit more contrast. So what we're doing here is simply, and look at the curve here, playing with the shadows. We're not really altering the right hand side, we're only altering the left. So we're making those shadows a little bit darker. Now mid-tones, I think just a touch, and highlights a little touch. Okay, and I think that looks okay. And what's important is that let's just put that back to 0. What's important is that you keep checking as you go, because what you'll find is that things will change, and incrementally it's easy to go off the scale and to get carried away. So I like to keep checking back, keep checking against the original, and make sure that I'm actually improving the picture. Now, what I've just done with my selective tones, I could also do with the tone curve. I've got more subtlety, if you like, in the tone curve. So what I could do is, these are pretty simple corrections. If I turn that off, if I want to drop my darks, I can do that. Raise my lights. Just drop my middles down a little bit, and that's more or less what we did here. We dropped our shadows to -17. We actually increased the mid by 4. And I think this is very much a matter of personal taste. It's up to you, and it's up to what kind of effect you're looking for. I often go straight to the tone curve to do my adjustments. Now the the irony of this, if you like, is that what I've created is a very shallow S-curve. What the contrast tool does also is create an S-curve, but the contrast tool is modelled on equal, if you like, equal intervals. So here I've pushed my brights up by more than I've reduced my darks. And if we turn that off and just use the contrast, we won't see that reflected in the graph, but what it's doing is it's dropping homogeneously across the picture the darks, boosting the whites, and I find this a little bit limiting. What I do sometimes is go use the contrast tool to get into the ballpark, and then that kind of frees me up from this S-curve. Then I can use the tone curve to really touch actual values of, say, lifting these shadows, for example. Vignetting is switched on because of the preset. So I think that looks quite good, and let's compare that. So flat, this looks a little bit more punchy. This is quite nice. Let's have a look at the colours. Now that I've got the light and tone pretty much as I want them to be, it's time to look at the colour. And I generally find that less is more here, and there's a pattern which has emerged over the many years that I've been doing this, which is that I invariably take it too far in the edit. So what I've got used to doing is literally walking away from the desk. So I'll do my colour edit, I'll set it, I might like the look of it, but don't forget that you're adjusting to tiny little increments, so it's very easy to get sucked into something that will become completely overblown. So what I do is I walk away from it, come back 15 minutes later, and sometimes it's an oh my god moment, what have I done? So generally less is more, and walk away from it, come back, and generally I find myself throttling it slightly down at the end of the edit. Now, colour temperature is global, and I usually let my camera choose the colour temperature, and at 538, usually 500 in that region, somewhere above 500 is going to give you a pretty accurate depiction of daylight. So I don't think there's any real need to alter this, but if there was, moving this to the right makes it uniformly warmer, moving it to the left makes it uniformly colder. We'll put that back. Now you can balance these effects, of course, so I could drop it here, but then I could add a little bit more green into it and get a sort of balance that way. Again, it's preference, it's a matter of preference. Okay, so that's, take this back to a shot, and that gives us our 5308 and -6. Now, colour black and white rendering, this can produce quite a change, and if we turn that on, if we go to the DxO camera profile here, this is a selection that reflects my Canon 5DS, and this has given us a little bit more punch in the picture. I think it's in it almost too much, so I'd probably just balance that out a little bit. And let's go back and forward. Yeah, that's looking good. And we're still looking, I think, if I was looking at this picture, I would look and say that's actually probably quite chilly. So I think we need to warm bits of it up. So let's take the orange values, and let's warm these up a little bit. Okay, and keeping an eye over here that we're not going to push this over. That I think is quite good. And let's go for the greens. Now that's a very wide selection here, and I might be tempted to use the dropper tool to just get these actual greens. So these turn out those sort of greens bordering on the yellows. So let's just push those up a little bit. Luminance up a little bit, and this is beginning to look quite good now. So so this palm tree here is standing out quite well. The other way that I can affect this is by I can narrow this band of colour manually by pulling these about. So I could narrow it down and really make sure I get exactly the hue. There's a number of different ways you can go with this. So you can either take the default, you can take the value from the color dropper, and then you can manually adjust it if you want that alteration to be a little bit tighter. Now, local adjustments are the icing on the cake. So when I'm happy that the image is going to look pretty good, I start in on the local adjustments, and what local adjustments are used for is really, in my mind, is to bring out elements of the picture that you want the viewer's eye to settle on. So you're leading the viewer's eye through the picture, and I typically use local adjustments to add more depth to the picture and to outline a path of travel, if you like, through the picture, leading the eye to that focal point. I find control points, which have been the sort of de facto local adjustment for DxO for many, many years now, still to be particularly useful. The introduction of the HSL tool into the control point adjustments is a real step forward with DxO, but control lines are also very useful. So have a close look at these. These really do make the difference between making an average picture good and a good picture great. And lastly, what I would do is I would go back to my data. I'm just going to have a look and see what's going on in here. So these are very dark inside the picture. I'm not sure how much I can actually lift those, but we might try with the control point. So let's have a look. We'll go to local adjustments, and I can add a control point. Let's just put it here. So what we're doing is we're checking out, and what you'll see with this is that the control point has selected the pixel luminance and color values from the center of the control point, and that's come up with, I've got my mask color turned on, so this shows me where the mask is, and it's restricted to the blacks in that doorway. I'll just lift it a little bit, so we don't get this deep inky black. What I want to do is to copy that. So put that there, and make another one, and put that there. Okay. So I'm going to make this doorway, just give it a name. Okay, and let's see, let's add another control point here. And I think we just want to lift these shadows ever so slightly. That's probably about as much as we want to do with that. And this is shadows in foreground. Yep, so in this picture what we've got is we've got sunshine coming from up here. Here's the shadow, there's the thing that's casting the shadow. And I think we just want to lift a little bit some of these. Okay, that I think I like. We don't want to get too carried away because this is, after all, a desert. We want a new control point. So we've got new, and we go here, make it bigger. Okay, and what I'm going to do is use the HSL wheel in here, and we'll use saturation, and this is going to just lift those greens, and I'm going to make a copy of that and put it over here and on there. Okay, so let's make another one. Make this one substantially smaller. And finally, we're going to have a quick look at export. Now I'm going to demonstrate a very simple export. The point I wanted to make is that it's at the export stage that noise reduction gets applied to the photograph. And the reason for this is that if you apply it earlier on in the process, it takes an appreciable amount of time, and so it slows down the edit. So DxO have positioned it to kick in when the export's done. Okay? What I will do is I'd export it to TIFF, 16 bits, full size, put it in the original image folder and export. Now what's going to happen now is it's going to apply the noise reduction setting, and here it is. So that's my finished picture. Let's blow it up to 200%. Yeah, it's looking much, much better. And with that lift of this darkness, we're revealing some elements of what's going on inside. Now this is perhaps slightly counterintuitive because of the actual position of the sun is so arguably this is perhaps not as realistic as it might be, but it does give a little bit more depth to the picture, and I quite like that. So we'll go back to there, and that's our finished picture. But thanks very much for watching, guys. Hope this has been useful, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.